Hello there, this is CJ Powers, and today we are going to talk about the three-act structure. And let me get some more light in here because it looks like I'm disappeared. Okay, so the three-act structure is what we're going to talk about today. Have you ever been in a position where you've wondered, is my story going to work? And is it not? For your story to work, it has to transform something. You have to move from point A to whatever other point is out there, whether it's point Z or point C. You have to have movement in your story. Now keep in mind, with movement in your story, the chances are you're going to use your main character. Now if you're a business, your main character might be your audience. Your story could be a little bit different. Maybe you're a pastor who is speaking to maybe a congregation, and you need them to take action, so you want them to be the hero of their own story. You have to decide who your main character is, but it has to be based on where you're trying to take your audience. Now, to use the three-act structure with that known, we want to take a look at these key things. Typically, we say the three-act structure is made up of three parts. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but the fact is it's not obvious because movies are usually made up of 4 parts or sometimes 8 parts, sometimes 6, sometimes 7. It depends on the structure they're using. However, all of those parts fit into the three-act structure. The three-act structure is easy to understand. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. We're going to look at it a little bit differently, though, because you need to be able to create a story that works for you from the standpoint of, this is my point I need to get across. How do I set that up in the beginning? How do I show them how it overcomes obstacles and issues, which is the middle, and what life looks like when you use this point, the end. That's how we're going to look at it today. So let's talk about the dynamics of the three-step structure, or the three-act structure. The first act is what we call the thesis world. Now, keep in mind, the thesis world sounds really educational. Every movie uses this, so fun movies, comedies, they all use it. So it's not about education. It's about entertainment, which is designed to open our minds to the message that you have in store. So look at it as being a form of entertainment, which of course it is, and you can drop one key nugget of education into that flow that you're creating. So Act 1 is all about the thesis world. Let's phrase it differently. Let's talk about it from the standpoint that the thesis world is actually your world, what looks normal to you. More importantly, since you have an audience, what looks important or normal to your audience? Back to the Future is a film that just about everyone by now has probably seen at some point or another. And one of the things that is so amazing about it is that it perfectly used the three-act structure. In the beginning, you learn about who Marty is. You learn about his desire to play in a band. And he wants to have his band play at the school's big dance that's coming up. And his whole desire is to make that happen. So the film starts out with him with an instrument and a gigantic bass system, an amplifying system. And he's blown across the room because it is so powerful. And he's like, cool. That just starts to introduce what his normal life looks like. A little bit on the kooky side because of his relationship with Doc, he's so into his music, he loses track of time, so he has to quickly run off to school because he realizes he's late. We find out that he is in trouble at the school because the principal was waiting for him because he's late a lot. But we also find out some other things about him too. We find out that he's a risk taker. We find out that he's proactive in the choices he makes. We find out a lot of things about him. We learn what his normal life is like. You see, not too long after that, we get to see what his family life looks like, and the dreariness of it, and the fact that his parents seem to be losers. And there are so many elements where we can understand who he is. In business, you want to do the same thing. You want to acknowledge your customer during a business presentation. You want to help them know that you understand their circumstances, their normal circumstances, what they're facing, what problems they face on a regular basis because of those normal circumstances. And therein lies really the heart of the normalcy of the moment. Now, if you're a pastor, you're paying attention to what's happening in social media and the news. You're paying attention to what's happening with your people. And you're starting to understand that, okay, there's kind of a normal life in our area that may or may not be different or the same as other areas in the country. But based on our people and kind of where they live and the lifestyle where our building is located, I kind of know what is normal. So in the beginning of your story, you start out the story revealing that normalcy. You reveal what life looks like so everyone can relate to you. That's why this 3-act structure is so important, whether it's with a book or a movie. The concept is you want the audience to know you can relate to them and you understand their thesis world. So the beginning of your story is all about the relationship. Now, we move into the second part, Act 2. This is the antithesis world. This is where everything gets flipped upside down and we realize that there is nutty things going on in this world that we can't quite get a grip on, but we have to solve the issue that we're facing. It's broken down into 2 parts usually. Kind of the fun and games aspect, where people are realizing the weirdness of what's happening, or how obscure something is, or this is not a part of our normal. And then there's the escalation part where it's like, oh my gosh, there's pain and suffering associated with this not normal. But at the same time, we know that our normal wasn't perfect. So we not only have to overcome this bizarre stuff that's happening, but let's overcome it in a way where we end up with a new normalcy that's better than the one that we described in Act 1. In other words, if we're going to suffer, let's gain from it. Now, if you're telling a story to your children, this is when you're going to have all kinds of obstacles that the main character has to get over. They have to figure out how to get past this and this and this to get to the place where they can actually feel like they're comfortable in life again. Because in the meantime, they are constantly facing things that are coming against them. In Part A, or what I'll call Act 2A, that's the exploratory side. That's the side where you kind of find the humor in things, you laugh at your own mistakes, you realize that, there's some absurdities that you're facing because of these weird obstacles that are hitting you. And in the B section is when you realize that those weird obstacles are there because there's other people that actually oppose who you are and where you're headed. And some of those actually come against you, and you have to do some form of battle with it. But since our battle really isn't with individuals, instead it's with kind of the ideologies of the day, we need to figure out how do we sort through this and rise above it to be what we need to be. If you're in a business setting, You've now learned the customer's biggest problem, which jumps you into Act 2, and you start exploring possibilities. Or, if you already know what the solution is, you explore what you went through in a search for the solution. In that search, these are the things that you found out about. These are the obstacles you had to overcome and how it was overcome. And soon you get to the place toward the end of the second act where you're revealing the fact that this is incredibly beneficial. Thanks to the exploration you did, you now have a beneficial solution. Not just any solution, it's a beneficial one. If you're a pastor in a church, maybe you're trying to deposit a moral into your people's lives, and you're showing the contrast during these obstacles of what a world person might do versus what the spiritual, enlightened person might do. Through that process of going back and forth, you reveal the better path. So whether your better path is a product or a service, or a moral that you want someone to catch, you need them to find it for themselves within your story. The best way to do that is to create this back and forth, this overcoming, the obstacle and overcome, obstacle and overcome. And these are all little mini ones, but they keep on escalating up, and the obstacles get so big that you get to the place where it's like overwhelming to the main character. You want it so heightened that they almost feel like giving up. And then you have that one last battle, that one last shot, that one last moment that turns the entire thing around. Now, the key is that you need something unique to happen to force you into that third act. Keep in mind, in the third act, there's something unique that happens here. Not only is that the act where you're overcoming, but just before the overcoming of it, you have to just throw everything against it to make it look almost impossible to solve, with the exception of this one solution that you have found, or this one moral that you want to teach, or whatever the thing is. Maybe for your kids, you're trying to burn into their hearts the desire to have a work ethic. Whatever it is, the key here is that you need to show that there is only one thing that can overcome this entire mountain of problems and issues. And that's the solution that you're trying to teach through your story. Now, as we moved into this third act, and everyone's excited, like, yes, that's the solution, that forces us out of the antithesis world. We are no longer, we kind of left home like the Wizard of Oz, right? In the beginning, we know that she lived a black and white life and that there wasn't much to it, and it was relationally just ho-hum, and there was no excitement, so she wanted to go to the fair, and the tornado comes along and tosses her into the antithesis world. There she explored all kinds of things, the colors, the small people, the flying monkeys. All kinds of things were explored. And throughout that whole process, she kept on trying to overcome obstacle after obstacle to get down that yellow path to see the great wizard with the ruby slippers. And then when she got to Act 3, and the witch had been melted away, we suddenly realized that she had overcome the greatest obstacle, and now the only obstacle left was for her to get home. And she had it all along, what it was that she needed. Her ruby slippers to just tap, and boom, she was back home. Now, when she got back home, though, she didn't go back to the original thesis world. You can't go back. Why? Because the main character had changed. And you and I both know that if you have changed, There is no way to go back to how things used to be. It's impossible. You cannot go back to the way things used to be. So the key is to make sure that when you're in that situation, that you understand what your new world is going to look like. And as you're at that point in the story, you have to make sure that your audience understands what that new thesis world looks like. Now, there's kind of a lesson being taught by just about everyone saying, once you've overcome the last obstacle, get out of the story as fast as possible. That's not totally true. You have to stay in the story long enough so people realize what that new thesis world looks like, so that they can decide if it's for them or not. Because if it's for them, the lesson that you have taught along the way, they now fully embrace. But if you get out of the story too fast, they can never embrace that message. So while, yes, you want the new thesis world portion to be as short as possible, you need it to be long enough to be received, accepted, and embraced. So if you're telling the kids a story and you get to the point where, and then he overcame this thing, and the kids are like, yay, 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 and then they run off and cook marshmallows. Wait a second. What does that new life look like now? Because that's where the hope of your story is placed. The hope is within that new ending, that new thesis world. So people say, yes, I can move that direction because I know what it looks like now. Not how to get there, but also what it looks like. So while the climax of your story gets them there, you have to have the epilogue so that people understand what it now looks like. So once they get there, they know how to develop what it's supposed to look like. Doesn't matter if it's a business sale. Once the customer says, yes, I'll buy it, which of course is your climax of your story, you now have to help them to understand what are the next steps. How is it that we build this new thesis world for you? If you're a pastor in a church, they might understand that, yes, they too can overcome this circumstance. But now what does that new life look like as a result of overcoming it? If you don't paint that part of the picture, they cannot build it. Every story must have not only that climactic ending, but the epilogue that reveals what that new thesis world looks like. Now, granted, if your story is a 4-minute story and you spend 1 minute on the thesis world, 2 minutes on the antithesis world, and then in the last minute of the 4 minutes, you spend half of that to get to the point of overcoming, maybe even 3/4 of it to the point of overcoming. You need at least that 15 seconds left to express what the new thesis world looks like, or maybe at 30 seconds left. It depends on how well you can paint a picture of what people really want from the story. So that is how the 3-act structure works. You get the thesis world, the antithesis world, where all the exploration happens, the new thesis world, which is in 2 parts, coming out of the overcoming all the obstacles and then revealing what that new thesis world is. There you have it. I hope that is helpful to you. And until next week, enjoy life and tell a story.